Hey everybody, thanks for warming the room up. It was frigid here 2 minutes ago. So this is us. I'm going to dive right into it because we have a lot of content. So I'm going to justify our existence as human beings and software engineers, and then I'll give you an overview of worker versioning, what we built. Shahab's going to demo getting you from sort of your existing worker setup to something better. And then I'll talk a little bit about our current project status so you can plan sort of when you might want to integrate with this stuff and give you a couple options for how to integrate. Then hand it back to Shahab for another demo. And then I will tease our roadmap. Okay, so I like to have a tortured metaphor. And so today's is recycling bins. So you're going up to a set of bins and you've got a can of soda and you have to figure out which bin to put it into. And you're expecting to just put it in the bin you choose. But that's not what happens because a hand reaches out of the bin and snatches it from you and puts it in a different bin than what you expected. So this is obviously surreal and unnerving, but it's also kind of how temporal workers work today. So they yoink your tasks from you, and they and so the way that works today is like workers pull for work, and they're hungry. They're like, please give me cans of soda to execute. And they are pulling what's called a task queue. And then the task queue is receiving tasks from workflows and activities, but there's no ability for you to like decide which puller gets which thing. So why is this bad? Well, for one thing, you can't kind of test a new build when you deploy it. There's no mode where it's like, I'm polling, but I'm not getting production traffic yet. And then once you're past that phase, there's no way to like ramp traffic gradually up on the new build to sort of dip your toe in the water. And then the headline problem that I think most of you are here, this is why the room is filled up, is that your new build can yoink old workflows and run them on incompatible code. I think they say nicking in these parts. And so how do users cope today? I mean, there's a bunch of different ways. Everybody has their sort of own flavor of how to deal with this. The sort of sanctioned way is to do patching, or in Java and Go, it's just called versioning. And in this, you're sort of like setting up a feature flag in your workflow, and you have to think about 2 different versions of the code at once, and it's kind of brain bending. Other people just sort of say, screw that, I'm just gonna like reset my workflow or terminate and restart my workflow. None of these are like good. So what we really need is a router, something in between the task queue and the pollers that you can control in your deployment system so that you can decide when tasks get which workflows. And that's really what worker versioning is. It's a task router that you can control. And it is basically going to allow you to take the complexity that you experience every time you deploy a workflow change and move it into your deployment system and solve it once rather than every single time you do an upgrade. To do that, you're going to need what's called a rainbow deployment system. In my experience, most people aren't familiar with this term, but it's basically a deployment system that allows you to juggle different builds at the same time and then choose when you're going to sunset those builds. In other words, you're going to sunset the old builds when all the workflows that were running on that build drained. And so that's the price you have to pay. The price of entry is Rainbow deploys. So to help you with that, let me give you a few concepts. You're probably already familiar with workers. We just talked about that. A worker deployment you can think of as a service. This is a new abstraction that we're introducing that corresponds to a service, and it groups like workers that are going to be running the same workflows and activities. Worker deployments can be versioned, and that is basically a version of a deployment version would be basically a snapshot of a version of the code, and then like a set of environment variables plus your service. That gets all combined into a deployment version. And so let's go through an example. So let's say you're an e-commerce application. You have a service called Orders that has various versions that are with the IDs as I've shown here, a combination of the service name and then maybe a hash of your code, for example. In this example, maybe each each deployment version has 7 instances of workers polling, and maybe it's got a high priority and a default task queue in case you've got some tasks that are higher priority than others. Okay, deep breath. We've been talking about the deployment side concerns, and that sounds maybe a little bit more complex, but it's all in service of the application developer. What is the workflow developer going to experience? As a developer who's using versioning, you'll make a choice when you deploy a workflow, or when you annotate a workflow as either pinned or auto upgrade. So all workflows of that type will be in that category. And the simplest one to think about as a developer is pinned. A pinned workflow is going to run on a given version throughout its lifetime. And that's very easy to think about. You don't have to think about the famous non-determinism errors. You don't have to think about interface compatibility between the activities and the workflow that calls them. You just sort of upgrade as if you're an undergraduate. Maybe not quite that fast and loose. Okay, and then your other option is an auto upgrade workflow. This is better than the legacy. This will hop to the latest build when you choose to shift traffic to the latest build. And so after you've done maybe some testing, if you want to do some testing, maybe you do a gradual ramp, and then as it ramps up, auto-upgraded workflows will move over to the new build. These still need to be patched because they can make incompatible changes as the workflow is running. And so you want to default to pinned if you can, but if your workflow is going to stick around for longer than you want your builds to stick around, then you're going to want to mark it as auto upgrade. So if you're willing to keep old builds around for a day, then like any workflow longer than a day, you'd want to mark as auto upgrade. All right. So Shahab's going to come up and show a demo of you kind of getting from an existing sort of rolling deployment system over to a rainbow deployment system using our new APIs.
Yeah, so I'm going to show you how to upgrade an existing worker to worker versioning. This is my worker. It's polling for a task queue. It's handling a couple workflows and activities. So in here, I have a charge workflow and a shipment workflow. One of them is short-lived. One of them can take a long time to complete. Let's see what we need to do to enable worker versioning for this worker. Okay. So not much changes in my code is needed. I just need to pass some new options. Now, GoSTK allows me to pass deployment options, and here I'm opting into worker versioning. I'm passing the deployment version. I'm going to show you in a bit where this comes from, but this is basically the value that distinguishes my workers from other workers of other versions. I'm also setting my default versioning behavior to auto-upgrade, and this is because that's the closest behavior to unversioned workers. I want to keep everything unchanged except a few workflow types that I make pinned until I get more confidence with the changes and make more workflow types as pinned. For now, I'm making the charge workflow type as a pinned workflow. As you can see, I can pass this when I register my workflow. So this is all the changes I need to make in my code. I don't have to touch the workflow definition and all that. But as Drew mentioned, we need to upgrade our deployment system to support rainbows. My deployment pipeline consists of 4 steps: build, deploy, promote, and decommission. Build is basically building my code, generating a build ID and a Docker image with that build ID. And then the deploy step, here is where my deployment version is generated, the value that I pass as an environment variable to my worker. And the value is basically my deployment name dot the build ID. An important thing here is that I'm deploying each version separately from other versions, not updating the same fleet in place because we want to have multiple versions running together, and that's how the Rainbow deployment. So I'm going to show you the next steps in action. Let's just see how this code builds and what happens when we deploy it. So I deployed my versioned workers. We added this section in the UI. If you go here, you can see your deployments, and my deployment is showing up here. And the version that I just deployed is also showing up here. The status is inactive. That means it's not yet receiving tasks. So now we are in control of saying when we wanted to get the tasks. And for that, I have this promote step. Let me show you what it does. It basically calls Temporal API to set this version as the current version. And if I go here, the status is current now. If I go to my workflows, now they start getting this deployment version and version behavior values, as you can see here. So at this point, I don't need my unversioned workers anymore. Any unversioned workers will hop into my current version in their next task. So I can decommission those workers. So now my workers are versioned.
So that's great. Why don't you show us make an incompatible change or something and show how it works?
Yes. Let me show you how it makes my life much easier when I make changes to my charge workflow. This is the short-running workflow that I marked as pinned. It has 2 activities right now. We needed to make a change, make an incompatible change that I show you in a second. And that is an activity is added in the between of these 2 other activities. And for those who wrote workflows before, you know that if you wanted to do this in a non-version workers, you would have to do patching. But right now, I can make any change in my workflow definition, in my workflow implementation, or interfaces of my activities and child workflows without worrying about the incompatibility issues for the pinned workflows. So let's just build and deploy this one. Okay, so I started my deploy process. In the promote step, I made an important improvement to my pipeline. I just ramp it to 10% first, wait a little bit, do some verification, and then set it as the current version. While it is ramping, let's see. In here, we can see most workflows are going to the old version. Some are hitting the new version. And we see the mix of these. Even though the versions were not compatible, all these workflows are completed successfully. That means the server is routing the task of each workflow to the right version, which is great. Now let's go back here. The ramp verification is completed. Version 15 is the current version now. And if I look at the versions screen, I see that version 13 is in the draining state, which means that there are some open pinned workflows on this version. My decommission script checks that status every 5 seconds here, and then once it is drained, it knows that it can safely kill the workers. So it's already drained. If I refresh this page, it is drained here. So that's it. That concludes this part of the demo. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahab. Okay, so let me orient you on time, and then I'll give you a couple different integration options that you can choose from. We've just shipped our second pre-release, adding the ramping support that Shahab just showed off. Our next release is public preview, which will be in Q2, assuming that all the feedback is good. And we'll be adding support. So we have support now for Go and CLI, and then in the Q2 release, we'll have the rest of the languages. And then we're adding more safety features and more support for longer and longer running workflows, which I'll tease later in the talk. Okay, so you can build your own Rainbow deploys, as Shahab just showed off, using those APIs. The idea, we're really trying to make them simple and flexible at the same time. Or you can use a Kubernetes controller that Jacob Legrone from Datadog built with us. It's a Kubernetes controller. It's Rainbow deploys out of the box, and it uses the APIs as well under the hood. So you can use it, like actually just use it and drop it in, or you can use it as a reference application to understand how you can build your own deployments. Okay, so everything that Shahab showed in the first thing worked pretty well, but I mean, I'm a PM now, and so I know that engineers are basically infinite bug factories. Oh, hey, Shahab, what have you been up to?
Yes, so we are all human developers, not fully replaced by AI yet, so we make mistakes. We push buggy code sometimes. Here's an example of such a buggy build that I tried to deploy, version 17. Thankfully, because my deployment pipeline had this ramping step, it detected the problem only at 10%, and it immediately canceled the ramp. So all the new traffic is going to the old stable version. But still, I have these workflows that found their way to this new problematic build, such as this one. And they are stuck on this version 17. So it turned out this one was a bug in the activity implementation that makes some bad requests to an upstream service. Generally, we have two options in these situations. Sometimes we can just we can afford resetting these workflows and roll them back to the old build. Sometimes you don't want to lose the state. You want to make the patched build and then move them over to the fixed one, right? And sometimes it's more complex and you need to do a combination of the two. Today I'm going to show you how we can move these workflows to a patched build. Before doing that, let's go and see the status of this version 17. As you can see, it is in the running state, which means that there are some open workflows, such as this one, that are stuck there running. So, yes. Okay, yeah. So we have the fixed build. Let me build and deploy it. I want to deploy it, but I don't want to promote it because I just want to move these stock workflows to it and verify that it's actually fixing them before opening it up for general traffic. And for that, I have my script ready to move these pinned workflows. I use this new temporal CLI command, workflow update options. It allows me to pass in a visibility query and then select a bunch of workflows based on that query and then set their versioning behavior and maybe pinned version. And here I'm selecting all the pinned workflows that are pinned to that problematic build. So that was version 17, and the fixed one is version 21. When I run this, it creates a bad job for me. Found 9 such workflows already completed. Let's go and check this workflow. Okay. It is now completed. It is moved to version 21. That's great that I see that it's not stuck anymore. If I go look at the history, this new event shows up here that basically signifies that someone moved this workflow to this new version manually. If I look at my list of versions, it's now drained. I know that there's no stock workflows on this bad build anymore. I can now promote my new version if I want to, or I can just leave it as is.
How can we prevent this from happening in the future?
Okay, good question. So we thought, well, how can we prevent this? And we said it would be cool if we can just run some of these tests, some of these workflows before even starting the ramp as acceptance tests. And let me show you that. So here I added a step 0 before ramp, and step 0 is basically running my acceptance test workflow. And that workflow, basically that runs this script, and then this starts the workflow. All my acceptance test itself is a workflow now. When I started, I passed versioning override here to make sure that this execution will be pinned to this new deployment version, because otherwise it would just follow the routing rules, the current version that I have set there. So with this override, it can hit this new version. And in this workflow, I can do anything I want. Here, I'm creating a test input for my charge workflow, executing that as a child workflow for my charge workflow, and executing that as a child workflow here, and validating that it finishes with the right output and all that. Same thing for the shipment, and I signal it, making it delivered, and then I validate that the workflow does the right thing. And here, by making them child workflows, I don't have to pass that versioning override again, because they automatically are pinned to the version that is acceptance this workflow is running on. So that way I can run my tests before even starting to ramp. Yes.
Thank you.
Back to you.
Okay, so as you can see, we're giving you instant rollbacks, testing, ramping, pinning. All these things are trying to avoid bugs in the first place, and we're giving you tools to remediate issues when they do happen. Okay, so future work. We want to add more replay tests, and that's basically we can run a workflow, we can sort of test a workflow that's already running on an old build on a new version and see if it's going to run without non-determinism errors. We want to make it really easy for you to do that, for example, alongside the tests that Shahab just showed. You could sample production traffic from a previous deployment version and try it out. Or when you move a workflow from one build to another, we could do a replay test at that time as well. So that's coming. Another one is a third type of workflow that we affectionately call trampolining, thanks to Jacob for that term. And these workflows this is appropriate for entity workflows. Entity workflows are like long-running workflows that represent, maybe an account or a shopping cart or something that could last for a long time, and it might continue as new to kind of checkpoint itself periodically. With pin during run workflows, you'll be able to pin them for the duration of just a single workflow run, and then when they continue as new, they'll hop over to the new version. And so the only versioning thing you have to deal with is that call to continue as new. And then we have the Kubernetes controller I mentioned earlier. It supports the things that we've just shown. And, well, Jacob, we have a surprise mystery guest here, Jacob Legrone. Say hi to Jacob. Why don't you talk about the roadmap a little bit?
Sure, thanks, Drew. You know my speaking fees are pretty high, right? Hi, everybody. So if you are interested in the Kubernetes controller, like Drew said, it supports all the features that Shahab mentioned, but allows you to kind of declaratively say what you want your rollout strategy to be if you want to do like progressively increasing ramp values for the traffic that new versions see. It also now supports pre-deployment gates that are just workflows that you run to completion and make sure they can succeed on the new version before you start sending any real traffic to them. And so at Datadog and also at Temporal, for like the workflows that we run internally, we are looking to onboard to the Kubernetes controller as soon as possible because we're really feeling the pain of maintaining patches within our workflow functions. And so that's our main priority right now. We have kind of a basic set of features that we're pretty happy with, and we want to make sure that the controller is ready to run in production environments as soon as possible. So we're doing a lot of production hardening work. We're also working on providing you installation instructions and container images that are publicly available to run in your environments. You have to be a little bit intrepid right now to actually figure out how to deploy the controller at the moment. So we're working to improve that experience. And we also would love your feedback. If you can go to the next slide, please. And the next one. Thank you. So in the Temporal Slack, we have the Safe Deploys channel. Please join that if you're interested in trying out the controller or in building your own solution for your own like deployment stack. And one other big area that we're exploring right now is auto-scaling and how do we deal with managing independently scaling historical versions of your worker as they are being trained. So lots of open questions for us to figure out with you, so thank you so much. And we also have a Birds with a Feather session happening in 30 seconds in the next room over, so we'd love to chat with you there. Thank you.
Okay. Questions? Yep, I was waiting for it. Ha, gotcha.
This may just be a semantic question, but at the beginning you said that effectively on the auto it would run on the latest, and yet within the UI you refer to that as the current, and the latest is actually, you know, numerically may not be the current.
Current is the correct, yeah.
So is it just a semantic?
Yeah, I should have said current.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
A legacy one would likely run on the latest with some probability, but yeah, the auto upgrade will run on the current.
Thank you. Is there currently or planned to be a way for the temporal worker controller or some built-in feature in Temporal to do more robust kind of progressive deployment outside? So I've seen that we currently have a system where we can roll out a certain percentage, wait for a certain amount of time. Is there going to be a support to either hook into an existing progressive deployment strategy where we might do health checks or load testing or other types of things in the controller itself, or is there plans to add that as support in Temporal itself, or what does the roadmap there look like in terms of those types of extra checks we want to make during the progressive deployment?
Do you want to take that?
You're asking about the Kubernetes controller?
Yeah, or any feature in Temporal, or just overall the question of how do we make sure that our progressive deployments are gated at each step by, you know, some sort of check of whatever we choose to do.
Right, yeah, so I mean, the way that Shahab showed off doing that in the demo was just to like run a workflow and then wait for the workflow to complete, and that workflow can do any health checks that you might want it to do. So that would be one way you could go. And yes, we are looking at sort of more dedicated endpoints to that would make that easier. And so then, but the ramping is under your control. So you could say ramp to 10%, do some checks, ramp to 50%. So that's completely under your control. And the question is just sort of making it more ergonomic at this point.
Does the current controller support like manually? I saw that there's a manual field. Does that just manually switch over or manually ramp up to the next stage?
In terms of what's currently supported by the controller, you can define a series of ramp steps with just simple durations between each, and so that's the like automated progressive rollout mode. You can switch to manual if you want to control the the rollout entirely with like an external system or using the temporal CLI like Shahab demoed. And if you want to run some kind of correctness test, you can do that with a pre-cutover hook that's running a workflow on the new version. If you need to like do some analysis of like observability data while the rollout is progressing through, that's not currently directly supported by the controller. However, if your deployment system has some kind of rollback functionality of its own where it can apply the previous version of the Kubernetes manifest, then the controller will cut over or switch back to that old version quickly is the idea.
Thank you so much.
So we're gonna head to the birds of a feather, to the library. And so anybody who has more questions, just like follow us. And you can be like our ducklings or whatever.
Okay, guess we're done. Next talk at 10 o'clock.